Great last week. Glenn Erby of the Eagles Wire and Ravens Wire. He contributes to both, and had a great interview with him before the game. He's got to be excited about the game. I don't know, Glenn. I've got a few things I want to talk with you about, but I guess the thing that surprised me, I don't know, sometimes it can be a sound quality issue with the weather, but man, that stadium seemed kind of tame for how big that game was. But maybe they were kind of cold.
I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was the cold. I think it was, the tightness from watching a situation where, once again, the offense struggles. So I think sometimes the fans are shell-shocked. I think it was a bit simple things that played a factor into it.
That just kept sticking out to me because it wasn't one of those. The Eagles won the game, but it wasn't a romp. There wasn't a lot of high profile moments that maybe you'd cheer for as a fan. But it was just kind of odd, the mood there in general. We were talking with Shayne earlier about how to prep for that kind of game because the winds were obviously swirling and the kickers were having to deal with that. We were just talking about some of the returning elements in those games because Shayne, you had an interesting point about that maybe is good to bring to air because one of the amazing things about that game for me, the kind of low key things that not everybody's gonna watch and notice, but Khalif Raymond was great on the punt return with some difficult punts because you've got to be able to deal with that if you're a Jack Fox or if you're a Jake Bates kicking, but it's also the people returning that have to deal with that. And you were talking about as a former kicker, you also train returners on the angle and things, and that's got to change with those winds too.
Absolutely, because the ball breaks in the air, not just with the wind, but even if you're in a dome. You hit a perfect spiral and it turns over. You have to understand if they're right-footed, the ball's going to break outside to your left as you're returning because the spiral turns over and goes a certain way. Well, if the spiral doesn't turn over and the nose stays up, it's going to flutter and fall back in hard to your right. And you have to understand, when it breaks to the left, it's going to gain yardage. When it breaks to the right, it's actually going to almost lose yardage as it's dropping down. So there's different ways you have to judge, and a lot of that comes from experience. I mean, they've got jugs machines that can shoot the balls, and the guys can practice it all day long, but it creates a really hard thing. And Jack Fox is actually really good at showing that he's going to punt one direction and he'll punt it the other direction. So you might think you're getting a read on his stance, and then all of a sudden you got to break across the field to catch the ball. But all returners are trying to watch film on those punters and try to get their tendencies and know how many balls turn over. I mean, I think PFF, Pro Football Focus, actually has a stat that tells you how many times a punter turns the ball over so you can get their tendencies. And then you learn what distances are they normally getting in a dome, outside, against the wind, with the wind, all of those situations. And you have to use that to know, do I stand 40 yards back? Do I stand 45 yards back? All of those things kind of play into it. And then understanding the ball flight. And when it's windy, good luck. And you've got to basically be a baseball outfielder. And you can't backpedal. You got to turn and run, look over your shoulder. You've got to try to get there first and let the ball come to you. Or if not, you're reaching for it and it's going through your fingers because you don't have much of a backstop. Like, there's so many factors that play into it.
It's intriguing how much nuance there is to all of this stuff, because that's one of the things why I like talking with you about all this stuff, because we just see, oh, well, he dropped the punt, or oh, he shanked the punt out of bounds.
It's his job. Yeah. Why can't he do that?
Exactly. There's so much nuance that goes into it. We were having this conversation, Glenn, because the previous writer that we talked to from Pride of Detroit, they're doing a Movember charity campaign, and one of the things that they have to do if the money hits a certain level, which it already has, is they have to catch punts from Jack Fox, which I think is very interesting. So that's how we got into this conversation initially. But that didn't seem to bother Jake Elliott much in that game. Bates of the Jakes, it was a battle of the Jakes for that game, for the kicking matchup. But Elliott looked super solid in that matchup. He looked really confident in that wind.
Yeah, I mean, he's used to kicking in that when he's used to kicking in that stadium.
Absolutely,
he's a Pro Bowler. He's a veteran. So at this point, that's just second nature for Jake at this point.
So Jake's funny story. Jake's pro day at Memphis He actually, it was really windy and really bad weather, and he did really well. And that's why the Bengals drafted him originally, is because they were so impressed with how well he did at his pro day. And, maybe he didn't make the squad, but he obviously has shown himself to be quite the pro and quite the very talented kicker who is probably going to have a very long career at Philadelphia. But he has done amazing, and you're correct. That outdoor experience every day in practice, but in games, is a huge advantage for him.
Yeah, he's spectacular. He's great. He's great at 50. He's great at long distance field goals. At one point, I thought he was maybe the second best kicker in the game. I know he's had some struggles, but he's definitely clutch when needed.
They're probably regretting, Shayne, that they moved on from him and had Randy Bullock instead. I guess that's who that was a veteran guy. You kind of understand it at the time. You're not necessarily going to know that it's a Pro Bowler that's going to move on to the Eagles.
Well, I think at the time, I think Randy just did better in preseason training camp. I don't know all the parameters. I wasn't there every day for it, but Randy did not do horrible. He had some ups and he had a few downs, and he didn't do horrible. But I think Jake has done a great job because he has kind of shown a lot of consistency and kept his downs very limited, and I think that's why he's somewhat of a David Aker-ish type icon now as far as kickers in Philadelphia.
Yeah, they continue to have strengths at every position. We saw that, Glenn, on Sunday. I mean, they just kind of outclassed the Lions to a degree, but I'm curious how you saw that game kind of from your side. Obviously, it ended up being a defensive battle, a little bit more than maybe we expected. We talked about a lot of the offensive weapons, but the defense kind of won the day on both sides. But I'm curious, this is one reason we like to talk to people from the other side of things, because obviously a lot was made. None of these games come down to one call. There's a million plays in these games, but I'm curious what you thought of that call at the end, because you cover the Eagles. You're more on that side of things. Did you think that call against Yasin should have been a pass interference, or how did you see that from your side? Because obviously as Lions people, we're going to see it a certain way. So that's why I like to get your side to kind of even things out.
I think it's a tough call. I think I'd be getting on here lying if I was to say, well, yes, it was an obvious pass interference. I think in that instance, maybe the home team, maybe the all-pro wide receiver gets the nod. Maybe he got a makeup call from earlier instances where Rock Ya-Sin might have been a little bit aggressive. But I think on that call, on that final play, that play there, I would have been okay with the ref not making a call or not calling anything at all.
That's the big thing for me, because we could go back and forth about whether or not it is, and that's not really that important at this point. But I think we're probably all on the side of let them play so that they can decide the game, because no matter if the roles were reversed, I would have wanted that if it was a Lions receiver and it was the reverse scenario, and then they called it in benefit for the Lions. You just don't really want to see a game end that way. So I just wanted to get your take on that. But what'd you think of the game overall? Obviously, it was a good win for the Eagles, but what were some of your takeaways seeing that Lions squad and kind of the Eagles moving forward here, Glenn?
I think that Lions squad, it's very explosive. I wouldn't be shocked if they played again, if they met again. We had this conversation last week. I think the most important thing for me was the Eagles' ability to get pressure on Goff up the middle, and they were successful in that. They were successful with Jalen Carter. He's starting to get in shape. He's starting to round into form. He got pressure. Jordan Davis was the NFC Defensive Player of the Week for his 3 back downs. So I think out of everything, being able to contain the running game, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to do his thing. He's an amazing dual threat, but not allowing him to just have those plays that he had the week prior, and then getting pressure on Goff up the middle was important, and then they did those things.
They took care of business, and like you said, that interior of that defensive line is amazing to me. Davis and Carter as that combination. We previewed them a little bit, but how do you see the Eagles' outlook now? Obviously, they're both of these divisions have tough schedules here.
Correct.
I don't know what the Eagles' remaining schedule is, but they haven't had an easy time, just like the NFC North teams haven't. But they're kind of putting themselves in the driver's seat, even though quietly out on the West Coast, there's a team out in LA that's kind of trying to pace things out there that we're all forgetting about if we're in the Midwest or the East Coast here.
Correct. I mean, I think that the Rams are someone, I mean, they played earlier in the season, they played in the playoffs. They're always a team that's there to watch. But, I mean, you have the Cowboys game coming up. You have Black Friday with the Bears, much improved team, playoff team. I wouldn't be shocked if they beat the Eagles. You still have to go to Buffalo. Still have 2 games with the Commanders, have a game with the Raiders, where who knows what could happen. So I think that, the schedule has been unforgiving this year. I think one of the big concerns is the defense is playing well. You have a championship defense, but at one point, is this offense going to click and look like it did at times last year? I understand the injuries. I understand the tough opponents you played, but I think that's the one thing, we're certain this team is going to make the playoffs, but how will they look entering the playoffs? How will they look against a team that's just as explosive and can score just as many points?
I'd love to see these 2 teams match up again. Not that the result would be different. We'll have to see. Like you said, the Lions kind of had some offensive scuffles. I wanted to talk about this on the show at some point. I just can't believe they went. It seemed like the Eagles were disguising their looks pretty well because they kept trying to run it up the middle at key times. They had the fake punt where they tried to go up the middle. They had other key downs where they tried to go up the middle. And obviously they were seeing certain things where they thought that was a good idea, but I have a hard time going, okay, that's Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis up there. Let's just run in between them. I bet we can fit up there.
Well, I think as a whole, I mean, that unit is pretty good. Moro Ojomo, he's the lesser of the names of the 3, but we can argue he's been more consistent. He's the pass rusher of the group. Jalen Phillips, you can't underscore what he's done in the 2 games playing the edge rusher position. He's been an absolute monster. Brandon Graham played 10 snaps. 10 quality snaps. Jalix Hunt is solid. Nolan Williams came back and played solid snaps. So you have a really good front. You really can't underscore what Nakobe Dean brings to the running, to the defense, his physicality. You see in the one play with him and David Montgomery where he caused the sack on Jared Goff. So I think things are rounded in the form. They're looking solid at key positions. So I think it's a championship defense. That's the least of the concerns. Like we said, the offense is the biggest concern. Potentially that number 2 cornerback, when you have a team like the Lions with 2 or 3 explosive, pass catchers, that could be a concern. But overall, Vic Fangio has done a good job of calling things at the right time.
There was a big drop off this year. It seemed like because you have DeJean, who's in that more nickel flexible kind of safety role, and then obviously you got a shutdown guy in Quinyon Mitchell, and then Ringo seems to be coming into his own a bit. But yeah, that was a question mark that they tried to address at the trade deadline, but didn't really work. But like you said, they've got a lot of talent there, so I feel like that. I feel like this was probably a good week for the Eagles because then it kind of buried the A.J. Brown thing. He got a decent amount of targets. There wasn't any complaints there, and hopefully he's not going on Twitch anytime soon. Not that I really know what that is.
I wouldn't. I mean, it's still a conversation. I mean, it's been a conversation every day this week. There's been a conversation about Jalen Hurts and his accountability, whether he's scared to throw passes, or scared to test defenses, whether he's trying to hold on to the ball, not turn the ball over. So even with the targets, the fact that he didn't go over 100 yards, the fact that he didn't have an explosive play, yards after the catch, it's still an ongoing daily conversation.
Yeah, I think this is part of the A.J. Brown experience, especially with the Eagles, that it's never truly going to die down, and he's kind of more in that diva receiver role that we talked about a little bit last week. But yeah, I'm hoping, Glenn, that we can get you back on the calendar because I'm hoping we'll see you in the playoffs as we talked about last week. But in between then, be sure to tell people where to follow you for both the Ravens and the Eagles coverage because you do a great job with both.
I appreciate you guys again for having me on anytime. Let me know. We can come on. We can talk about whatever, but you can find me at the Eagles Wire, the Ravens Wire, USAtoday.com, the Cover 2 NFL on Twitter, and we'll be around. I expect both these teams to do a play again. Hopefully it'll be in Philadelphia. I'd hate to see these 2 teams match up on that turf in Detroit, but I expect, both teams to make the playoffs, both teams to make deep runs, and I expect these 2 teams to face off again.
And I wouldn't count out that other team that you cover either, because they've been kind of lying in the weeds. But with Lamar Jackson back, I think they could be kind of shooting up the charts here.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I talked about it today. I think it's a race to 10. There are 7 games left, but I feel like 10 gets you into that AFC playoff field. But I wouldn't be shocked if they only lost 1 or 2 more down the stretch. You know, they're getting healthier, and for them, it'd be about getting into the postseason and then actually, you know, making something happen in the postseason, especially for Lamar Jackson.
And if people are taking bets, I'm taking Lamar Jackson over Aaron Rodgers right now. But that's a little bit biased. I've never been a big Rodgers fan. So, but appreciate you joining the show, Glenn. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. But we'll be sure to follow your coverage. And and we appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you down the road.
Definitely. Thank you and Shayne again for having me on Huge Fans of your show. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Glenn. Take care.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.